$180 million to do, which is approximately the cost of a skyscraper, to build a whole skyscraper. So oopsies, right? That's pretty horrible. That's Aon Center story. Now it's in granite. And I would also like to show you and point out the color of the river. Take a note of the color of the river. Isn't it beautiful? Oh, it's green. It is naturally green like this. Some days it's, muddier, but it's looking pretty nice right now. Our river is naturally green, and I'll tell you why it's green in a little bit. But first, I want you to compare all this green river water to the color of all the windows on the building to your right, the Sheraton Hotel from the 90s. Now, Mies van der Rohe. Remember this name, Mies van der Rohe. His buildings all look exactly like this, and he is called the most influential architect to come out of Chicago. Why? Well, these are from the 60s. These are Illinois Center. But he was building just like that in the 1940s. This style of glass skyscraper, he was the first to build glass skyscrapers in the world, Mies van der Rohe. That's why he's so influential. Now compare that glass boxy style of those large black skyscrapers to this building directly to your right. The glass section sticking off of the Gleacher Center from 1994 tips its hat, if you will, across the river. It's got those windows that look just like these windows too. For fine arts, Beaux-Arts looks like a wedding cake. Hey, there's one ahead of us. The white building with the clock tower is from 1921. This is the Wrigley building. It was built to be the Wrigley corporate headquarters, like Wrigley Gum and Wrigley Field, same Wrigley, but they're no longer in there, but it's still the Wrigley building. Beaux-Arts is ornate, like the wedding cakes, right? Now, to your right, another ornate office tower, that tall stone tower with the American flag flying rather majestically at the top right now. That is the Chicago Tribune Tower from 1925. And that style of architecture is called Neo-Gothic. And clearly it looks a lot like a Gothic cathedral. Now, speaking of height, the second tallest building in the city, straight ahead, standing at 1,389 feet tall, or 442, oh, excuse me, no, that's not true. 1,389 feet tall, this building is called the Trump Tower, can you tell? So subtle. The Trump Tower is hotel and residential from 2009 by the architect Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. And this is a postmodernist building. Let me show you how this building is site-specific. Look up the side of the Trump Tower. You'll see it has passing by. Riverbend is a postmodernist building. It is site-specific. The curving facade is like the curving river. Huge project that will completely block their view. This is going to be 3 skyscrapers here, and they will be 50, 70, and 90 stories tall, which is huge. The Trump is 96 stories tall. And check out the view here that they're getting. Oh, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful view. And to me, this spot where they're doing construction is the best view on the whole river. And I love to mention what was there before the construction started. It wasn't another building, it was a parking garage. It was a squat little, which is trains. This is an active railroad that they're constructing. Okay, I was talking about construction on top of train tracks, right? I want you to notice to your right, that's what's happening here as well. This will be a new skyrise, or a new high-rise, a skyscraper, a residential high-rise. And they're building because Amtrak owns the rails and the land. And Amtrak tells these developers, I can't sell you this land. These are our train tracks, we're not about to sell you our train tracks. But they'll sell me what they don't want, what they don't use, and that's the air on top of the trains. So as a developer, I can literally purchase the air on top of trains, and it's called Air 1930. This is called 2 North Riverside Plaza. And notice the stone and the setbacks. The stone and setbacks, that's Art Deco. And by the way, what else is built on train tracks? Every single building ahead of us on the right. Every single who's on the tour, it's the hole in the wall to your right. Because as far as those lights go, you can make out the support columns, the gridwork of pylons that hold this building up. Straight under the building, train tracks, right? This is Air Rights Construction. You can hear and see the train tracks. They show skyscrapers over the decades. It's really quite convenient. So to start in the 60s, to your right is the typical 60s skyscraper here in Chicago, and in world cities, this is true. This style looks familiar, does it not? It's a big glass box. That's all there is to it, right? And this is how we built in the 60s. This is Mies van der Rohe's influence. Everything we built in the 1960s was just like Mies van der Rohe's radical style. At one time, radical became commonplace in the 60s. And it's such a plain style, but we wholeheartedly subscribed that less is more was superior to anything else. Until we wanted something else, right? We moved along. We changed. And we went to the 70s to this style. This white building here is Gateway 3 from 19... In any city, you can see that. So from the 70s, we hopped to the 80s ahead of us, the shiny, curvy building. Shield your eyes, I suppose, all of a sudden the sun is out. But before I talk about the 80s, to your right, check out those X's. These X's are an external steel skeleton. They hold the building up from the outside. You know, on top of the train yard, we have the 80s skyscraper, Gateway 4 from 1983. And this is when postmodernism starts, in the 80s. So we've got the curving and the Green River. This building very much tips its hat to the river. And by the way, they say that 80s skyscraper, which is always an interesting question. Every art movement or architecture movement is named by the following generation, right? So we're still functioning in postmodernism, question mark? Now, okay, check out this large building. To your right, another spectacularly massive one. This one has 2.7 million square feet in it. And I bet you can't tell what this used to be. This was the largest post office in the world from 1932 when it was built until 1991. 91. And yes, it's empty. Yeah, look at the windows. It looks a little rough. It does look a little bad. It's been empty for almost 20 years, actually. But let me tell you why this was a post office, right? Why do we have a 2.7 million square foot post office? It seems ridiculous, but it actually makes perfect sense. It was, no matter what it was, from a catalog, and it was shipping to your house from that post office in Chicago. That's why it's so large. We essentially were shipping everything to everybody for decades through this post office, which makes it make a lot more sense, right? And it also makes sense why we're not in there anymore, because this is the sound of a bridge lift, by the way. This bridge was up earlier. Don't ask me why. I have no clue why. They're doing some work on it, probably. Now, anyway, it makes sense why we're not in that big old post office anymore, right? We moved out of there. We downsized out of there. It's empty but not abandoned. It's owned by a developer who's been exploring different ways to develop it, but nothing's stuck yet. Oh, the bridge is up right now. Okay, then. Well, that's unusual to see on this tour. Isn't that special? Every bridge on this tour lifts. Every bridge on this tour opens. Chicago has the most moving bridges in the world. And isn't that spectacular? That plus the weird cloud effect is a really beautiful view right now. That's guaranteed income. That's a job. So architects moved here in droves after the fire, and 14 years after the Great Fire, the skyscraper was invented here. This is the birthplace of the skyscraper. Because of the fire, really. And of course, we rebuilt the city as a city of skyscrapers after the fire. It was actually kind of the best thing that ever happened to the city. The fire is widely held to be truly the worst and the best thing that ever happened to Chicago. It's both at once. And speaking of skyscrapers, there's our crown and glory disappearing into the clouds, standing at 1,451 feet tall, or 442 meters tall. That building is called the what? Let me hear it. I love hearing both answers. Good job, the Sears and the Willis.